What is up, Knicks fans? Welcome back to yet another episode of Fireside Knicks. I'm your host, Dylan Backer. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, but now we are back and we're going to talk about the New York Knicks. So they just concluded a road trip where they went 3-2. Now, it didn't really feel like they went 3-2. They had some pretty ugly losses in there. They lost to the Jazz and they also lost to Dallas, both in pretty ugly fashions. And they were in a nail-biter with the Hornets yesterday, a Hornets team that was missing LaMelo Ball and 5 of their top 6 scorers. So even though they went 3-2 and overall, when you look at it that way, they had a good road trip, it didn't really feel like it. It felt like there was a lot of good, but also some bad. So we're going to, kind of just recap that road trip a little bit and kind of talk about some of the big pressing stories that came out of it. So first things first, we can talk about the good things, the wins over the Suns, the Nuggets, and then the Hornets. Now the Hornets win, I know, isn't exactly like a good win, but a win is a win in my book, so, at the end of the day, we'll take it. I'd rather an ugly win than a good loss, so we'll take it from there. But we'll start with Phoenix. Phoenix and Denver. I should actually put them two together, Phoenix and Denver. Those two games were brilliant offensive performances by the Knicks. I mean, just phenomenal. And those are big tests for the Knicks as well, because those are two teams that are going to contend in the Western Conference this year. Those are two teams that are going to be very much in the running to make an NBA Finals run. So really was encouraged by the performances in those games. Against Phoenix, they shot 58% from the field, 48% from three. You had a 30-piece from both Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns. You had 19 and 11 from Josh Hart. Everybody was doing their own part. They scored 138 points, which at the time was a season high for them. They just absolutely dominated that game offensively. Defensively, yeah, you wish it would have been a little bit better. They let Phoenix still shoot close to 50% from the field. They still let Devin Booker get 33 points despite them not having Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal in that game. But one way or the other, a win is a win. They played great offense and they were able to just outrun them on the road too. I mean, Phoenix is a great team at home, and the Knicks just really dominated them on their home floor, which that was a really encouraging start to the road trip. They scored 44 points in the first quarter of that game. They just looked locked in from the start. And then moving on to the Denver game. That's the best game I've seen them play in a very long time, and it might even be one of the best games in franchise history. Now, I know I made a video already where I talked about that individually, but that game, I just want to reiterate again, that game was just phenomenal. I mean, there's really no way around it. OG Anunoby with 40 points in that game. I mean, he had been unreal in the entire month of November, and I think that deserves recognition, even though the last two games in November weren't the best for OG Anunoby. His overall month this season in November was just phenomenal. I mean, that game against Denver especially, 40 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, was a plus 21. Knocked down 5 of 7 shots from outside the arc, 16 of 23 overall on the night. Just phenomenal. I mean, I've talked about it before, and I'll keep this version of it short. But OG Anunoby, we're seeing a different version of him this year. We're seeing a guy who is willing to score more, who is willing to, create some more shots for himself and other players as well. A guy that's looking to be more aggressive. He's become the third option on this team. He has. I'm going to get into why he's become the third option, because I think everyone knows who I'm going to allude to later on in this episode. But OG has just been phenomenal this year. He's been one of the more consistent players on the Knicks this season. Yes, the last two games of the road trip, not the best for him, especially the game against Dallas. I mean, he was just brutal in that game. I'm sorry, but it happens. Players are going to have nights where they just can't find anything. There's just a lid on the rim. And that game against Dallas was one of those games. He missed his first 11 shots, finished out the game 3 of 15. So it happens. Bad game happens. But overall in the month, great month for OG Anunoby. Great month for the New York Knicks, honestly. I mean, they started the season off 5-6. I know a lot of people were worried, but they ended up finishing the month winning 6 of their last 8 games, and I think that's a positive thing you can take away from all this. They started out slow, but they finished up strong. Yes, it was a little ugly towards the end of the month, but they finished out strong. Now I can get into some of the bad things, and specifically, I can't talk today, specifically the losses against the Jazz and the Mavericks. Now, the Utah Jazz game, I think that game's an anomaly. I think that is just one of those games where they couldn't hit any shots whatsoever, and you're not going to win a game if you're not hitting shots. It is that simple. If you're not making any of your shots, you're not winning the game. That game, they shot 39% from the field and only 33% from three. OG Anunoby had 27 points and Jalen Brunson had 23, but, everybody was kind of just inefficient. Karl-Anthony Towns had his first true bad game as well against Utah. He only shot 31% from the floor. He did have 16 rebounds and 16 points, but very inefficient game, so I don't think anyone's going to be looking at that, glossing over it, and being like, oh yeah, great game. No, it was not a good game, and I don't think Towns would agree with you that it's a good game, so if you think that's a good game, it's not. But that's besides the point. That's just one of those games where you kind of just got to flush it down the toilet. You got to forget about it. Obviously it's one of those games. It sounds ironic because sometimes you don't want to forget about those tough losses. You kind of want them to humble you a little bit and show that you still have work to improve on, which I think is something you can do. But again, I don't think the process in that game specifically was bad for the Knicks. I think they were getting the looks they wanted to get. They had that big 17-0 run as well and almost came back into the game. Unfortunately, they ended up just falling short. I think, though, that, like I was saying, the process is right. They were getting the clean looks they want. They were making the right plays. They only turned the ball over 9 times in that game. They were doing the right things with the ball. They were taking care of the ball, making good plays. The shots just weren't falling. They just were not falling. It happens. I mean, the rim protection was not good that game either. That's been an issue that has clouded the Knicks all year, which I'm hoping will get fixed soon once Precious Achiuwa and Mitchell Robinson are both back on the floor. I know Achiuwa is very close to returning, so we could see him very, very soon. But regardless of that, I think that was just one game you kind of just need to just forget about. Now, the Dallas game. I think that's a little bit of a different situation because the Knicks, this was when kind of the teams switching everything against him kind of got exposed because we saw the Charlotte Hornets also do that yesterday, and it almost made them lose the game as well there. In the first quarter against Dallas and against Charlotte, they only scored 15 points both games in the first quarter. Now, that's terrible. That's awful. Considering how good this offense has been this season, that was alarming to see back-to-back games for it to occur. But specifically in Dallas, it was also a little alarming because they didn't have Luka Doncic in this one. They haven't really they haven't had to play these teams' stars with the exception of the Denver Nuggets because they did have to play Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic and they dominated them. But against Phoenix, they didn't play Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal. Against Dallas, no Luka Doncic. Against Charlotte yesterday, no LaMelo Ball. So when you look at it that way and you see how complacent these guys were getting, you kind of want them to be a little bit better than that. You want them to take care of business when you have your guys healthy. You have your starting 5 out there on the floor. You're all talented starting 5. You're very elite starting 5. And you're kind of letting these teams that are severely undermanned kind of get the best of you. And that's not what you want to see. Obviously, I'd rather see them kind of have these moments now in November than in March. But still, I think everyone will agree you want to see some improvement in there, right? But anyways, looking back to this Dallas game, they allowed Dallas to shoot 56% from the field and 51% from 3. I mean, Spencer Dinwiddie, Kyrie Irving, Quentin Grimes, obviously, too. Quentin Grimes, a former Knick, and Najee Marshall. Those guys absolutely killed the Knicks. I mean, they did. They were hitting tough shots left and right. I mean, sometimes you got to tip your cap. Sometimes you got to tip your cap and just be like, okay, you hit some tough shots. It happens. It does happen. Sometimes you just make the shots that are heavily contested. They go in and you can't do anything about it. And those are the ones that hurt the most. They are. Because you know what you're capable of. You're capable of putting up a really strong performance right there. But they didn't. They finally played some tighter defense, but Dallas was just hitting everything left and right. And the Knicks offense, they crumbled off the switching on everything. They couldn't get anything going. In fact, they only shot 7 for 29 from 3 in that game, 24%. They did hit 27 of 30 free throws, and they did shoot 46% from the floor. Jalen Brunson did have 37 points, and Karl Anthony Towns had 25 and 14. But overall, it was just a rough night. Obviously, OG Anunoby was just awful in that game. 3 of 15, as I said before, 0 for 8 from 3, 8 points in 39 minutes, and was a minus 15. That was just an off night for him. An off night. It happens. It's something that I'm not going to look too deep into. Obviously, the last 2 games of the month were kind of just very slow from OG, but he was so good overall in the month of November that I'm not going to panic over 2 bad games. It's not the end of the world. Now, the guy that I really want to get into, and it coincides with the Hornets game, Mikal Bridges. I think everybody knows by now that we want to see more from Mikal Bridges. We have been saying this now for quite a while, even more so than we did at the start of the year. But, against Charlotte, that was brutal from Bridges. I mean, absolutely brutal. There is no sugarcoating that one. He went against Charlotte yesterday, 8 points in 36 minutes, 3 of 10 from the floor, 1 of 4 from 3. He was a minus 14 despite the 1-point win. A minus 14. He's not playing with the same aggression that he did have on both ends of the floor as he did in previous years, and that made him a great player when he was in Phoenix and in Brooklyn. And it's alarming. I'm not going to, be super worried about it. I'm not going to give up on him because one way or the other, he is a part of the future for this Knicks. He is going to be a big part of this championship team that they're trying to build. He's going to be around for the next couple of seasons, whether you like it or not. So we kind of just have to embrace that, and we have to hope that Bridges just turns it around at some point. But it is definitely alarming seeing him not play with as much aggression as he used to be playing with, and that goes for both ends of the floor, like I said. He's not playing as great defense this season. His offense the past few games has been putrid. I mean, in the 5-game road trip, he averaged just 13 points, shot just 36% from the floor, and 29% from 3. And perhaps one of the more alarming things about it, too, especially, was that he only attempted 2 free throws during that 5-game road trip, and even went 7 straight games without attempting a free throw, period. Before last night against Charlotte, the previous time he attempted a free throw was earlier this month against Chicago when they were still at home. So he nearly went this entire road trip without attempting a free throw. I mean, that's not acceptable. It's not. And I know some players are very much restricted to the 3-point line, so you don't see them at the free throw line as often. But Bridges is not one of those guys. Yes, one of his strengths is supposed to be 3-point shooting, but this is a guy who is also capable of creating inside, creating in the mid range, being able to facilitate a little bit, attack the basket. I mean, the guy is 6'6" with a near 7-foot wingspan. You gotta attack the basket, man. You have to. You gotta take advantage of that. And I feel like he's just not doing that. He's kind of restricting himself to corner threes and stuff. Don't get me started on the above-the-break threes as well for Bridges, because anywhere aside from the corners, he's been putrid. I mean, the numbers do not lie. He's just been awful. But aside from that, he's kind of restricted himself a little bit. Now, again, I'm not going to panic because I did say this earlier in another episode, but out of all players that had to adjust their roles this season on the Knicks, Bridges was the one who had to change their role the most, because he went from being a number 1 option in Brooklyn for a year and a half to kind of having to sort of go back to that role in Phoenix while also still using the skill set that he applied in Brooklyn. So he's got to kind of make a big change and figure out where exactly he belongs in an offense with Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns patrolling it. So I get it. I understand it's tough, but we are close to 20 games in now, so I think it's time for me to say that I want to see some better performances from him. I think everyone can say that too, but we are 20 games in, and one side maybe that may not seem like a lot to you. It's not a lot. I mean, it's not like we're only a fifth of the way in or a fourth of the way in of the season, but regardless, I don't want to see a 20-game stretch where Bridges is just not being that effective. I know he's a better player than this. I know it. I've watched him in Phoenix. I've watched him in Brooklyn. This guy can hoop. This guy is a better player than how he's been playing, and it's just disappointing to see him kind of lay an egg when we need him to really step up. I mean, yesterday, he was benched for most of the fourth quarter. That's the second time in the road trip that he was benched in the fourth quarter, because against Utah, same thing. He only had 8 points. He shot like 3 of 15 from the floor in that game. He was just terrible, and he was benched the entire fourth quarter. And then yesterday against Charlotte, he came back in for a couple brief defensive possessions in the final seconds of the game, but for pretty much most of the last 8 minutes, he was off the floor for Deuce McBride. And Deuce McBride has been outplaying him so far. He has. Maybe overall in the season, he hasn't exactly outplayed him, but ever since Deuce McBride came back from injury, he has outplayed Mikal Bridges. He has. I mean, he's scoring better, he's scoring more efficient, he's taking more shots, and he's playing defense. That steal and dunk that McBride had yesterday changed the momentum for the Knicks. It gave them the momentum shift that they were looking for the entire game, because they were pretty much playing from behind the entire time to a Hornets team that was missing 5 of their top 6 scorers, to a team that was a bunch of G-Leaguers. I mean, it really would have been an unacceptable loss if they would have lost to Charlotte yesterday. And I think, obviously I'm not going to only point the finger at Mikal Bridges if we would have lost that game, because there are problems that run deeper than that. They were turning the ball over a lot yesterday against Charlotte, 19 turnovers, very inefficient basketball all around. It's not just Bridges, but I think we can look at it and say that he's making the biggest difference in that. If they would have lost the game, it would have been a big difference if it would have went to Mikal Bridges. I'm not going to blame him solely, because like I just said, there are other issues that go along with it. Bad defense, poor turnovers, all that, poor transition defense, you name it, right? But we just need to see better play from Bridges. That's really all I ask for. I know I mentioned OG was pretty bad too against Charlotte, and he was. 3 of 11, 0 of 4 from 3. He only had 8 points, but he was a +3. He was a +3, and I don't always like to look at plus minus. I use this with Jericho Sims because plus minus can be a very misleading stat. It can kind of, tell you that a player's doing a lot better than they actually are. But OG also played 40 minutes in this game, so if he was a +3 in those 40 minutes, that means he was making an impact in other areas despite not shooting the ball well. Mikal Bridges, meanwhile, was a -14 in almost that same amount of minutes despite the win. So that means that he was a deterrent yesterday. He was someone that was really just kind of killing the Knicks a little bit. And like I said, it's just disappointing. I want to see better play from him, but I'm not going to give up on him just yet. I know what he's got. I know what he's got in the tank. I've seen him play very well before. He's had some good games too with the Knicks this season, but I know we can see more than this. I know for a fact that we can get some 30-point games out of him at some point in the year. I know we can. I just don't know when it's going to be. That's really all I got to say about that. But guys, I don't have much else to say about the road trip. I'm just glad that the road trip is finally over and now they're heading back home, because I'm kind of sick of all the road games they've had to play. They have only been at home only a handful of times this year. So I'm glad to see them heading back home now to start December on a, start December off good. Get yourself into a rhythm, and by Christmas time, really get yourself going and show everyone who you are. They're 11-8. They're not bad right now. They're doing pretty good this season, but we know this team is better than that. We know this team can end up being on, close to a 50-win pace or even more than that. We know this team's capable of even winning close to 55 games this season with the amount of talent they have on the roster. They just need to get healthy, and they need to get going. The chemistry needs to keep developing, and guys like Bridges and Anunoby and guys like that I mentioned, they just need to keep stepping up and actually play good basketball, because they make the biggest difference. You have your stars doing the work, but the role players also make a huge difference. So that's really all I got to say about that. Really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let us know what you think about the road trip in the comment section below, and especially about Mikal Bridges as well. I do want to hear about that from you guys. You can follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course this YouTube page that you are watching the video on. You can follow my personal Twitter account. It's right there on the screen. And I'll see you guys in the next episode of Fireside Knicks. Peace out.